hopefully the technology will work and be cooperative. How are you feeling, broadcast? Very good.
Good.
Excellent. I declare open the public hearing of the Standing Committee on Primary Industries inquiry into factors shaping social licence and economic development outcomes in critical minerals projects across Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past and present of the Indigenous peoples all across Australia. This hearing will be audio broadcast and the transcript of proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. And as a matter of courtesy, I'd like to invite the members of the committee to introduce themselves. I'll commence to my left.
Okay, Michelle Landry, member for Capricornia, Central Queensland, have the most coal mines in the country, my electorate.
Excellent, Mr Burnell.
Matt Burnell, Federal Member for Spence, Northern Suburbs of Adelaide.
Ms Cook, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hello, I'm Trish Cook from Western Australia. I'm in the seat of Bullwinkle.
Thank you. And Ash, if you can hear us? Not sure that Ash is right there at the moment, but she is the member for Barton in Sydney, near the airport thereabouts. Meryl Swanson, Committee Chair and proud member for Patterson in the Hunter and Port Stephens regions. So I would now welcome representatives of the Minerals Council of Australia to give evidence. And for the Hansard record, would you each please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to all the committee members. My name is Tanya Constable. I'm the CEO of the Minerals Council of Australia.
Good morning. My name is Demas King. I'm the General Manager, Trade and Investment for the Minerals Council of Australia.
Nice to be with you. Chris McComb, General Manager, Sustainability for the Minerals Council of Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Matt Daniel, Principal Advisor, Indigenous Partnerships and Communities, Minerals Council of Australia.
And Shane Evans, Principal Advisor, Economic Reform, Minerals Council of Australia.
Thank you very much. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion. And I know we've already seen you and we are very, very pleased that you've been able to join us again. Our last hearing was somewhat disjointed, interrupted by democracy, as I pointed out. But anyhow, please, it is good to have you back.
Thank you, Chair. I think we won't make an opening statement. We'll just stand ready to answer your questions this morning.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm really particularly pleased to see you all, but indeed you, Mr Denyer, as well. And look, I think we'll go to first names, if you don't mind. We all do know each other pretty well, and I think that's appropriate if you're comfortable with that. So, look, one of the, as you've heard me say, this inquiry is looking at factors shaping social licence and economic outcomes from critical minerals across the country. And in evidence that you gave preceding this hearing today, one of the things that stood out was that the average length of project time is 17 years between first someone coming up with the brave idea to extract something from the ground here in Australia to employing people and exporting it or doing other things with said material. So that's a long time. We don't have the the luxury of 17 years for a lot of projects we're trying to get off the ground with critical minerals. We know that we live in a time of strategic competition across the globe and there are tensions. We know that we are in a valuable position. Mr Burnell, did you introduce yourself? Oh, good, sorry. And after I've just said first names, I've gone straight back to formal. So actually two of the big things in this is that time pressure and the social licence piece, and that's why I've singled you out, Mr Denyer, because I do think there's some lessons to be learned. So how do we compress that 17-year time frame without reducing things like ESG and all the things that are important. You know, we do want to maximise the benefit to the country from critical minerals, but in doing that, we don't want to, you know, do terrible things to its people and its land, and we want everyone to be a winner from this, and we've got to learn the lessons of the past. So if we can pick up, that's where I'm going today. I want to know, you know, how we can compress that time frame and really do the social licence well. And yesterday we heard from ASPI, and Dr. John Coyne had some good evidence in that he said two things which have stuck with me. He said, firstly, he feels that broadly public servants do a good job, but they sometimes don't understand the urgency and risk involved whilst they're trying to ensure that regulatory frameworks and things are properly done, which is important. Sometimes there was a lack of understanding of risk and urgency and the amounts of investment and things. I thought that was very good. That was a good point to be made. And he mentioned a couple of examples where social licence and interaction, particularly with traditional owners, has been done really well in difficult situations like TELUS, he mentioned. So I'm interested to talk to you today about, let's get down to tin tacks about how we do this better. That's my thinking. Other members, I'm sure, will have other ideas, and I don't want to dominate the whole thing, but that's where I'm going today. And of course, I want other people who are joining us to have the opportunity to ask their questions and get information as well. But that's where I am at.
Fantastic. Chair, would you mind if we started with, because it's a 17-year period and there's the assessment and approvals process and the exploration that occurs right through to the rehabilitation is sort of in that 17-year period. Could we start with that, with the environment assessment and approvals process and how we could do it better, and then come back to components, the social licence, the traditional owners? Is you happy with that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Chris, do you want to start?
Sure, and obviously the project approvals, environmental approvals is a component of that 17 years, as Tanya mentioned.
And that's the average. We should make that clear, because anyone listening might be saying, what's this 17 years about? It's an average of some are obviously longer, some are shorter, but that's the average of a project from conception to delivery, I suppose.
Exactly, and just for context, you know, by our estimates for the Commonwealth component of that project, noting that's often added on to the state component, we've got an estimate of around 1,371 days. I can't recall what that is. It is about 4 years. So just for context, well, I guess the responsibility for this obviously sits across both states and the Commonwealth, with the states having primacy, obviously, for the project development process for mining. So there are levers the Commonwealth can pull, and of course there are levers that states can pull. And I think both levels of government are looking at what those levers actually are. At the state level, it's about bringing together. It's often about coordination and bringing together disparate approvals into a single process. So they're looking to kind of narrow single front door, coordinated general type approaches to ensure that the experience of the user, the proponent, is being able to answer the questions once and have a single point of contact with government to facilitate their project. Navigating that process is really, really important and often very, very challenging. And the beauty of the coordinated general type approach is they have a lever, and that lever is they're able to look across the agencies undertaking the approvals process and say, look, you know, you're not meeting your time frames, you know, you're not taking a risk-based approach, whatever the case may be. But that's the states. So I'll just then come back to the Commonwealth piece, which is obviously very pertinent to us here today. And there are a range of kind of critical kind of factors that influence probably four things. One, the process of engaging in the approvals process. Two, the substance of the approvals process. Three, the regulatory posture or the culture. And four, the appeals. And we shouldn't underestimate how important the appeals process is, because it often is the tail wagging the dog. If you're wondering why some regulators are being highly risk averse in the way they approach projects, for example, wanting more and more information about more and more things, it's because they're always mindful of being challenged effectively, so judicial review and the like. But if I just go then to talking about kind of something that's front of mind for us today, which is the relationship between the Commonwealth and the state governments, and duplication, and I suppose the objective of the current reforms process and the reforms process that have been up and down over the last kind of 10 years. And in terms of process, there are kind of a range of very duplicative factors in each process. I mentioned community consultation requirements. You need to meet that both at the state level, and there are separate ones for the Commonwealth level.
So can I just stop you there for
Absolutely.
1 second, Chris? I think this is really important. So do you think that there are possibilities to bring those together?
Absolutely.
So, you know,
yeah.
and I'm saying this as much from a community perspective as well, because I've had situations in my community where I won't say it's consultation fatigue, but you have often a situation where community consultation happens, and I've witnessed this myself, where the department comes into a community and sort of says, oh, we're thinking that there's a project and we'd like community feedback. Well, the community says, well, how big is the project? What, you know, can you give us some more details? And it's sometimes the granular detail that people really are seeking, and they're much more knowledgeable these days, and they want the information, and often the department doesn't have that, or won't release it, or can't, or, you know, and people get really frustrated because they're like, well, you've asked us for our opinion, you're not giving us enough information. And then you know, to be quite fair, in some cases, and I have had this in my own community, the department sort of says, oh yes, we've consulted with the community, and it was shameful. It, you know, equated to about 2 hours of nonsense where it was just this amorphous information. People went away more confused and actually hostile about the project, and then the ramifications of that came through. So I actually really think this is an important point. So that's why I've stopped you.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there are obviously several components, and my colleagues, I'm sure, will speak to this as well. But there are several components to that. One is the statutory requirement for community consultation. From an EPBC perspective, you make a referral to the Commonwealth, you undertake a community consultation as part of that, and then the Minister makes a decision on whether you're a controlled action or not. And then, of course, once you've done the assessment, there's a further community consultation process.
Can you just talk to the controlled action?
Absolutely. I'll step you through the whole process if you like. So from a Commonwealth perspective, these are how the two kind of work together. One, you'll make a referral, so basically it'll be the kind of the bones of the project, what you're proposing, and the question you're asking of the Commonwealth is, do I fall under the Commonwealth regime? Are there controlling provisions that I'll be affected and therefore be assessed and need to be approved for? There's a consultation component to that. It's very short because it's very high level. And then within about a month, normally, the Minister should be making a decision on whether you're required to be approved or not, so whether you're a controlled action or not. Assuming that you're a controlled action, I'll choose the pathway for that controlled action, and you may be assessed by the Commonwealth under one of the 9 matters of national environmental significance, whatever your project is. And that assessment process may or may not be undertaken with the states under an accredited arrangement, so like a bilateral assessment or an accredited arrangement. Just to give you a bit of a sense for how that's operating, around 38%, according to Professor Samuel, of projects are assessed under bilateral arrangements, despite these arrangements being placed with most states and territories. So there's clearly something going on there between the two. Assuming that you continue to carry through with the.
Sorry, Chris. I just need to understand what you've said there a little bit better. So just take me through that again, please. So, 38% of projects are assessed fall under the state and federal jurisdictions. Is that what you're saying?
There's already streamlining built into the Act. The current Act, even prior to the reforms, effectively states the Commonwealth can enter into what they call bilateral agreements with individual states and territories for the states to undertake the assessments and then provide that documentation.
Right, okay. So that's a positive
to government.
On the surface, that would seem like
that's a
streamlining.
That's exactly right, but it doesn't really work. That's the
Okay.
issue. It does work in some cases.
So explain to me why it doesn't work. This is what I want to get at.
Well, for a start, perhaps the most pertinent data point here is, as Professor Samuels uncovered, around 38% of projects that are assessed between 2014 and 2020 went through that accredited arrangement, that bilateral assessment arrangement. So that sort of suggests to me that there's perhaps a problem between the Commonwealth and the states, that all processes aren't going through this single door.
Okay, so really the figure you're giving is only 38% of them are going through a bilateral process. So the remainder, which is obviously a larger percentage, are not, and that's problematic. Okay, thank you. Right. I do want to thank you. I understand that better now.
Absolutely. So projects will go through, we'll call it just the Commonwealth pillar. So once they formally are required to be assessed by the Commonwealth, they'll undertake their assessment. That might take a couple of years of back and forth with the department, whatever the case is. And at the end of that process, there's another public consultation period. The assessment is finalised, and the Minister obviously makes their decision. Now, parallel to that, we have the state process. And the state process largely covers the same things. For example, threatened species is a key area of intersection between the Commonwealth and the states. The list of threatened species are largely the same between the two. They're largely harmonised, which is a good thing, right? We want to ensure there's some consistency there. But what that suggests to me is the Commonwealth and the states are basically assessing the same thing, but they're assessing them in parallel. Secondly, there are other triggers which I won't spend too much time on. For example, the water trigger for coal seam gas and large coal projects. The states have constitutional responsibility for water, and they certainly assess that. And therefore, once again, we have a parallel process around assessing water resources for coal projects at the Commonwealth and the state level. The nuclear actions trigger is another example where if you're like a uranium mine, for example, and this has changed, a uranium mine, you therefore trigger the nuclear actions trigger. It's now called the radiological actions trigger. Essentially what that means is the Commonwealth has to assess your whole of environment impacts as an operation, effectively. So wholly duplicating what the states are doing. So it just gives you a couple of examples of, in substance, they are duplicating what's happening at the state level. Now, one of the challenges in the streamlining pathway, which is the current assessment bilateral arrangement. So say the Commonwealth decides and the states get together, the proponent agrees to put it through an accredited arrangement. So the states undertake the assessment, and then they provide a report to the Commonwealth saying, we've undertaken the assessment, we're okay with this project, these are our recommended conditions. And what we are finding more and more is that that will then go to the Commonwealth, and then they'll, despite the goodwill and intent of these agreements, the Commonwealth will undertake their own assessment anyway, or go back to the proponent requiring more and more information, despite them going through this streamlined pathway. And that's resulted in some proponents going, well, that's a risk because I don't know about this issue until the end of my approval process, my assessment process. I'm not even going to bother applying to go under this streamlined pathway. Instead, I'm going to do them in parallel because then I can manage the risks of each project despite them being duplicative. So that's probably the critical process, I guess, at both the state level and the Commonwealth level.
Can I just play devil's advocate here for a moment, Chris? I'm guessing that if it's duplicative, then the proponent would be able to provide the information to the state and then provide, presumably, depending on what's being requested, the same information to the Commonwealth. Now, is that a misapprehension? Is that a false assumption? Because that's, you would think, well, in today's modern day in technology, is it, I don't want to say is it a copy and paste exercise, but is it okay, you've been asked to provide this information. Is it all that difficult for proponents to provide the same information to the Commonwealth? I am playing devil because, these are the things we must consider.
Chair, it's an excellent question, and I could probably touch on a few points there. You have to repackage that information up for the Commonwealth. You can't just provide the state-based environmental assessment to the Commonwealth because a lot of it's not material to the Commonwealth. The states take into account land use planning, a greater focus on kind of infrastructure, community development, a whole range of things that states are responsible for. Whereas the Commonwealth take a much more narrow view. So you do need to package it up to meet that narrow view. The second piece I'd just add as well, just because you provide them both with the same information doesn't mean you're going to get the same answer.
Okay.
This is where things get very, very tricky. And I'll just make one brief comment. The challenge we have is that the Commonwealth undertake their assessment very, very narrowly, focused on things, fair enough, that are important to them, but with no context of everything else that's happening. So what we end up with is, for example, situations where Commonwealth requirements conflict with safety and health legislation at the state level. For example, under one of our members has noted to me that under a Commonwealth requirement, they've got barbed wire fences around some parts of their operations, to obviously for safety and health reasons, around to keep people away from dangerous and hazards and so on. Under the Commonwealth requirements, they say you need to remove that barbed wire because the issues are fawn can get caught up in the fence. Fair enough, that's a fair comment, but the problem is, are you going to be removing that fence and then allowing people access into these areas which create other hazards, which of course are prohibited under state-based safety and health regulation? Another example is requiring proponents to have fauna spotters walking ahead of bulldozers, looking for animals as they clear. That doesn't make any sense, and there's no way any of our members would put our people at risk by doing so. So you can see there are conflicts there because states look at everything together, whereas the Commonwealth takes a very narrow view. And there are different interpretations around methodologies of assessment as well, but I don't want to take up all the air on this one, but it does create significant risk at the end of that process, regardless of whether you've gone through an accredited arrangement or not.
Excellent, thank you. That's excellent.
If I could just add to that, so just to summarise what you end up with, there's always conditions that are attached to these projects depending on how high risk they are, but if they're in the Commonwealth process, then they're considered to be matters of national environmental significance. You always have different offsetting requirements that are required under state legislation compared to Commonwealth legislation. And some of that, if I think of New South Wales and some projects there's a requirement you can't offset elsewhere on projects, you have to do it within New South Wales. So that might be problematic if you don't have the ability to do that offsetting. You've got inconsistent monitoring obligations occurring with both projects, depending on what the state requirements are compared to the Commonwealth. You've got conflicting rehabilitation all of the time, and there's always separate reporting that might be set up under a particular regime that the state has in how they collect information compared to the Commonwealth. So you've got duplicative systems with different approaches just in managing that project. And that's before that's once it's approved. But along the way, if there is hold-ups and appeals relating to any particular application, if there is a third party that puts in an appeal along the way and it's held up, it might be at a state level, it might be at a Commonwealth level, invariably the other one will not move until that appeal process is finalised. So you end up with time delays along your project, and that's adding timeframes to the overall project. So I just wanted to add that in to give a bit more context. It's not just about the issues that have been raised, but you've got duplication and delay occurring all the way through that have to be managed. Now, I think that the Commonwealth and the states are starting to put in processes to try and manage that, and I would like to think that that is going to work. I will say that I think that the Commonwealth, probably from what I'm observing already, and you mentioned ASPI gave some great evidence about consultation. I think that consultation needs to be real at the Commonwealth level. We are working with the Commonwealth Environment Department to provide case studies on environment on the way through. But I'd like to think that the department are really committed to that. I think that the secretary of the department is very committed. I think the minister's office is very committed. I would like to see people under the secretary really committed to actually working with industry and others, but there's a range of industries that to actually get to the heart of some of these issues, rather than we'll hold a workshop and we'll take into account some of the things that they're saying, as opposed to if we're sitting before a department and we're trying to go through projects and give them an indication, it's because these delays are real and there are always pathways through trying to actually fix the problem. But that consultation needs to be commitment and real commitment, rather than, oh God, we've got to get this legislation, this implementation done. And if we're talking to people for a long period of time, that's going to hold up actually doing the implementation, as opposed to taking a step back and working through projects one by one. They might be old projects, and all of the different consequences to the project time delays in order to get a better approach. That's what we want to see, and we don't feel that that's still the case. Now, I've been a public servant and I've always been on the side of making sure public servants are being heard, but I've observed this now firsthand, and I think that's got to get better.
Okay, and just for the record and for our evidence, you were referring to the department. Which department?
That's Department of Climate
Change, Energy, Environment and Water.
So referred to as DQ, I think.
DQ, yes,
DQ,
that's right.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So I think I'm going to go to Ms. Cook for a line of questioning. Trish, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not sure who would like to answer this. I'll leave it to you to decide. But I recently visited a proposal for mining of palladium in my electorate in Bullwinkle, and I was really happily surprised that the mine is considering, it's a proposal, and the mine is considering having their own solar panels on site to maintain their power supply and also put back to the grid. They're looking to take wastewater from the coast and pipe it up to the mine to be used as the water supply, which is a considerable distance, I guess, 90 k's or so. And they're also looking at, using the rail which the grain growers use. Was primarily for the grain growers. Now, this is all very terrific. I was really happy to know that they're providing for their own utilities. How common is that across the board in other areas? And is this the way of the future in regards to, or who bears really the principal responsibility for providing that infrastructure, according to your members?
Thank you for the questions. Multi-user infrastructure is the general proposition across most of the mining areas, but also delivering to regional and remote communities. There is a big gap in its delivery though, and what you see is a tightening up of supply of things like power, water, roads, gas, and other infrastructure as industry comes in and starts to grow. So there is a tension that emerges between the needs of the community and the needs of the operation. Multi-user infrastructure that is coordinated as it's needed actually provides for the capacity needed to supply communities, which are important to operations, as well as the operations there, which are important to communities. So the key here is that in different areas, there'll be different pieces of infrastructure that will be under pressure or needed for the current community and the current operations, industrial operations, farming and others. Rail is a really important piece of that. And it's pleasing to see that rail is being, spare capacity in rail is being used with farmers and miners. And that does happen in many areas, particularly around southwest Queensland to the port in Townsville. We also see it, as you pointed out, in northern WA and other areas around the country. There are gaps in that infrastructure where other parties might find it useful for additional infrastructure to be provided, and that those links are quite often strategic in the services and the opportunities they deliver. An example of that is the link between the North-South rail line from the Northern Territory to Adelaide and the link between Mount Isa and Townsville, and linking Mount Isa to Alice Springs actually does provide a significant strategic opportunity, as well as the potential support for industry and communities in that region to grow.
Trish, I think when we look at that common user infrastructure, and this goes to the approval process too, the companies are looking to reduce risk and provide certainty. So the common user infrastructure, if it's all pre-approved too, that substantially reduces risk. It allows a range of projects to move forward, not just a single project. So all of that infrastructure makes a huge difference. But at the end of the day, any way to reduce cost is going to be supported by companies. So I think right across Western Australia, but I could say this about every state, there are so many projects now that are doing what you have, what you have said. They're trying to get energy costs down, so they're putting their own energy sources onto projects or close by projects, because they may not have that 24/7 availability to them. There may be disruptions on energy in particular, so that's becoming more common. That wastewater issue and trying to reduce the amount of water that is being used, recycle and make projects more sustainable, because at the end of the day, communities actually gain confidence from that. That is becoming much more common. I think every one of our projects, I don't think there's a single project that I'm looking at when I think about the membership that don't have individual circumstances where they've put things into place to meet that sustainability that is required for them, and to meet their regulatory obligations, and prove to communities they're actually doing better than what is being asked of them. But at the end of the day, where I think governments can be really helpful is where precincts can be put forward with all of these different infrastructure requirements, the energy, the port, rail, road, water, utilities. If that can be hubbed around the country, we're going to get more projects on the ground, and for you in Bullwinkle, I think there's huge opportunity, as I would say, for many members on this committee.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Trish. Michelle.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to talk about the workforce. So. I suppose there's two sides of it. So we get people all the time saying we're trying to get into the mines, and there's just not positions available for them. But then on the other side, we're finding that there's not, like, probably university positions for, like, engineering, the trade positions in TAFE and all the rest of it, to get that skilled workforce going. Do you think there should be more direction from government to actually, help move forward so that we can get more people into engineering, all the different trades, to actually work on these projects, because I think what I have seen happening is that, and talking to the Vice-Chancellor of CQU in Rocky, that engineering had become a dirty word there for a while, working in like coal mines, but I think right across the sector it seems to have its ups and downs. So how do you see that moving forward?
4 years ago, we, as a whole industry, the graduate level was not even 90, 89 people. In 2025, we're up to 289. If you look at engineers, if you look at countries,
next, so I'm sure they'll be keen to extrapolate on that.
If you look at countries like China, they put out thousands. I know they're bigger economies, but there's a real focus on the importance of these types of occupations. So we can do a lot better in Australia, but it doesn't start at university level. It starts down at primary school level and high school level, where the importance of mining needs to be, I think, amplified across the country and celebrated across the country. It's still viewed as an industry that is a dirty industry, when in fact it's something that is critical for the economy and can be utilised in other I think in other industries if we work better together. So I think our curricula should be addressed, and I only had a discussion as late as yesterday with a former Vice-Chancellor of a university who, we were saying, well, how can we get more people, graduating from universities? And I said, well, perhaps people like you that have Nobel Peace Prizes can perhaps start to help us celebrate these industries and changing the curricula. So changing the curricula and getting earth sciences back into high schools, making sure universities, it's Central Queensland, it's University of Queensland, it's Curtin University, a little bit in Wollongong and Western Australia. The rest have actually vacated because there's not that interest in going into into engineering or into geology, into metallurgy, where we need to see more and more people. So I think that governments and industry working together to actually do that. We've got liaison people within a few of those universities, and we pay for that. We do an industry-led set of courses, and I talked about those last time. We bring people into a 2-week program to show them what is happening on the ground for mine sites. So there are a couple of ways, but having constant interaction with universities, and I think government could be very helpful in amplifying that, the importance of mining.
Actually, can I just add on to that, at CQU, they've had those STEM programs that they go around, and I don't know who sponsors it, I think it's done by mining companies. They do it for a couple of weeks, and these students come in and do it, and that'd probably be something to do in other areas rather than just Central Queensland, which is, mining heartland. So probably things like that, even sponsored by government, I think would be a good way to move forward.
I think I'm hearing recommendations filtering out of today's conversation. Matt.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming back in and providing evidence. I just want to go to I want to go back to the timeline to get projects commenced, essentially, and I want to just explore some of the issues around social licence with First Nations heritage and culture. Now, clearly there's an issue with perception given events like the Yukon Gorge disaster, I call it, the blatant destruction of heritage. There is a huge trust deficit within the Australian public around this cut and burn attitude of what we need to just, in the words of other people in this place, in relation to gas and oil, drill baby drill, or dig baby dig. Where's the line in getting the balance right between meeting the expectations of the mining industry to extract critical minerals in a way that takes into consideration the needs to preserve our cultural heritage in this country, and working alongside our First Nations people to find a happy medium so that we don't see the likes of that happen again? How do you condense it down so that the timelines are shorter, but taking that into consideration? Because essentially, the way I see it, the trust deficit is an extremely large hill to climb, and whilst I hear that we need to get the timelines down, that's a pretty significant hill to get over the top of. So what's been done, I guess, by the industry?
Mr. Burnell, thanks for the question. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on with what Chris said, that trust deficit is there because every single time that there's an amendment, we have to go back out to community and consult. So there is consultation fatigue with traditional owners. Mm-hmm. Traditional owners don't have the capacity, plain and simple. They just do not have the capacity to deal with every single project that is on their land, whether it's mining, alternative energy, whether it's government, state, local, federal government. So that's where that trust deficit does happen, because you're going out initially and fantastic, this is what the project is going to be, but 17 years later is when we finally get an approval as an industry. So that is part of the problem. What I will say is that as an industry, we are committed to engaging and collaborating. There's a difference. Our members have stopped talking about engaging and they've started talking about collaborating, because it's a different way of thinking. And if I can then go even further than that, if we look then at some dollar figures and people figures, we've got approximately 6,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working for our members. So we've got people within our organisations, we've got senior leaders within our organisations, we've got senior leaders within the MCA as well. We've got a significant spend with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander businesses, and we're looking, just in 24-25, we're looking at approximately $2 billion. So that's a lot of procurement spend in there. The next element is moving from procurement partnerships into what does equity partnerships look like, and we're hearing that a lot. There was a conversation at the Broome Indigenous Chamber of Commerce earlier this week, specifically talking about how do we look more how does the Indigenous business sector look more at equity partnership arrangements. So between industry, government and communities asking that's where we're looking. Duplication is a really big thing. That is the other element that I will pick up on, is that the duplication that everyone spoke about earlier does not help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, does not help traditional owners at all.
Can we talk about the Tory model and collaboration? So, yeah, sorry.
Tanya just reminded me of a piece of work that we're doing with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance and the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, which is the Traditional Owner Representative Institution model. It's a proposal that's been put to industry, to not just our industry, but across industry, to how do we respectfully engage with the right people? Mm-hmm. That's the issue we've seen very recently, where companies have not engaged. Not just companies, but also non-government organisations have engaged with the wrong traditional owners. By engaging with the incorrect traditional owners, that has an impact on local communities and lateral violence that we don't, as what I will say, the bigger end of town, we don't see that community element. So that needs to start to, the traditional owner representative institution model that has been proposed is something that we all need to get behind.
So just for clarification, so that's currently in Victoria, and that's providing some positive indications that that model works.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's really, really helpful.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
correct.
Actually, just on that, is it possible for the committee to receive some additional information about that?
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
It sounds as though that's something that we should take a closer look at.
Yes.
No, thank you. Very sadly, we're out of time. It's gone very quickly today, but I really feel as though this has been a valuable conversation today, where we've actually gotten down to tin tacks about, rather than broad motherhood statements about how everyone must do better and it all must be quicker. We're actually starting to drill down into the components that could make that happen, which I think is really important. So look, thank you. You'll be given the opportunity to review the Hansard and make any corrections to transcription errors. And would you mind forwarding that information about the traditional owner institution model to the Secretariat at a time that the Secretariat will let you know about? We've got some timing issues around Hansard at the moment, so we'll be in touch with that. But thank you. It's been a really valuable conversation, and we do thank you for your interest in this inquiry, and we hope to provide a very useful report with some good recommendations. Thank you.
We didn't get to a point. There's so many things in that 17-year period that we could unpack.
Sure, yes.
And I did bring Dr. Evans.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No.
I know you don't have
okay.
time today.
No, that's okay. Let's just. We're having a break later, so I'm just going to eat into that a little bit. We've got you here in front of us today, Shane. Let's not do one of these duplicative processes where we say again. Let's do it.
Are we sure? Because we can put it in writing.
Engineers. Are you okay? Great. Thank you. Thank you.
I can be very quick and just add a
Thank
bit
you.
more context. So, just in that 17 years, that's for a project that made it through from conception to the end and into production. So, for every one of those projects that make it, there's an enormous number of projects that are proposed and get through some amount of the way there and then fall away. So, we've got 10 committed projects in the critical minerals space. That's about $5 billion. So once they're at committed stage, they've got their approvals, and it's very likely that they'll go into production. But sitting behind that, there's about 30 definitive feasibility projects. So they're projects that have got their feasibility. They haven't quite secured their final approval. So they're in that 4-year period. And there's, like in Australia, that's about $14 billion potential investment. But at the moment, only 1 in 20 of those projects make it from feasibility into committed every year. So it's sort of just...
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? 1 in 20, did you say?
On average, over the last sort of 10 years, based on the government's data, about 1 in 20 make it from feasibility to final investment decision. So it just gives you a sense of, we say 17 years for a project, but for every project there's a range of other ones that might have even come right close up to feasibility but didn't get the conditions right to make it to the financial investment decision. So there's a lot of risk all the way through this that we have to be mindful of too. I'm very happy to provide more information on that.
Could you, please? Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you for that, Shane.
I think that will show the time frame and the constraints at each part of a timeline for the committee. So if we can unpack that for you and show those constraints at each at different parts of a timeline within the 17 years, you'll see where perhaps some recommendations could be made to speed up that time frame. So we're very happy to provide that to you.
That would be very helpful. Again, thank you for that. So look, thanks for coming today. As I said, you'll be provided with some Hansard to review, but we really do thank you for your input into the inquiry. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
I might just suspend the broadcast momentarily till we get our next witnesses in. Thank you. Joel, see what I've done here? Would you mind doing this for future so I just know the time frame? Yeah, that'd be great. Just saves me having to keep ducking back to the... Thank you. Just a tiny thing, but it's really helpful. Yeah, thank you. Okay, here we go. All right. Excellent. Thank you. Broadcast will recommence. I now welcome a representative of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you. My name is Peter Derbyshire. I'm the Deputy CEO of the Australian Academy of Technological Sciences and Engineering.
Thank you so much. Although the committee does...
Oh, sorry, no, John McGarr.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please, our guest joining us virtually.
Good morning. My name is John McGarr. I'm a fellow and a board member of the Academy. I'm also, by way of background, a chemical engineer and economist that spent 35 years in the mining and minerals industry on various on-site roles, strategic roles, assessment roles, and global functions. So I hope I can be of assistance.
Thank you, Mr McGarr. I appreciate you joining us as well. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as the proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And I'll invite you to make an opening statement in just a moment. Just before I do that, I always like to allow the committee to introduce themselves to you. I'll commence with Ms Landry.
Okay, Michelle Landry, I'm the Federal Member for Capricornia in Central Queensland.
Thank you, Mr Burnett.
Matt Burnell, Federal Member for Spets, the northern suburbs of Adelaide.
And we too have members joining us virtually. I'll commence with you, Trish, please.
Hello, my name's Trish Cook. I'm the Federal Member for Bullwinkle, which is in the Perth Hills.
And Ash?
Hi, it's Ashambi Habahar, the Federal Member for Barton, which is just under Sydney Airport.
And Meryl Swanson, the Chair of the Committee and Member for Paterson, which is a couple of hours north of Sydney in the Hunter and Port Stephens areas. So I now invite you to make an opening statement before we proceed to a discussion.
Thank you and good morning. We would first like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, and reflect on their long history of achievement as Australia's first scientists and technologists. We pay our respects to elders past and present. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today. Electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, computer chips and mobile phones in your pocket, and many of your appliances in our homes all rely on critical minerals. The world is using more minerals and in greater volumes than ever before. They are becoming essential to how we live our lives, our economy and our national security, and Australia is central to all of it. Of the 31 minerals on Australia's critical mineral list, Australia has moderate to high geological potential in 27 of them. This creates an opportunity for our country, an opportunity to expand our mining industry, an opportunity to create employment and genuine co-ownership with local communities, and an opportunity to control our own resource security. But we need to do more than just dig up minerals and sell them. We need to be involved in the processing and value adding once our minerals are out of the ground. We don't need to do everything, but we can't do nothing. We will all need a skilled workforce in order to do this. But we aren't producing enough mining engineers and geoscience graduates. 10 years ago, we were producing 300 mining engineers graduates. Today, it's just over 100. Geoscience enrolments fell 43% between 2013 and 2022. If we want to expand our critical minerals industry, this is unsustainable. To make the most of this opportunity, more students and more diverse students need to choose mining engineering, geoscience and related fields. That will require action across the entire pipeline, from schools to universities to industry and government partnerships. Students need to see that these are not just jobs of the past, but careers that will shape Australia's future. The challenge before us is clear: to turn our mineral wealth into industrial capability, skilled jobs and long-term economic resilience. Australia has the opportunity. Now we need to build the workforce and the industry to match it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Darwish. I appreciate that, and I think there wouldn't be anyone on this committee that wouldn't be in furious agreement with the things that you have said there. How do we do it is the big question, and from an engineering perspective, some of my best, most practical friends are engineers, and the beauty of them is that they tend to be solutions focused.
Absolutely.
So to yourself and Mr McGarr, we are interested in drilling down further. You may have heard some of the evidence that was previously given. The committee is really, we're not just here for busy work, we're actually here to make solid recommendations. So we would not only value your oversight and insights into this, but some of the solutions. It is important that we maximise the value chain on critical minerals. It is important that we train more geologists and engineers, but doing so, and if history is, you know, a precursor to the future, then it seems to me we're on a downward trajectory, and we've got to not only stop that, but we have to reverse it. Yes. So reverse engineering and getting more engineers. So can you talk to us about that? So let's get into some granular detail about what you feel some of the solutions are.
Absolutely. So some of the solutions in the training of engineers in engineer space, and John, please feel free to add anything that I may miss, is very much around, I guess, the perception, and this was mentioned a moment ago with the previous witnesses, is a perception for mining, geological sciences, geoengineering, exploration mining is seen as almost a dirty career to go into, which we know is not true. It is the fact that we need these people to be finding the critical minerals, developing the critical minerals, and honestly then processing them in an environmentally and sustainable way, which doesn't always happen when we ship our raw ore off to other countries. That's the area that we need to really encourage students to get into. And I'm in furious agreement with the Minerals Council, who said a moment ago that this is not something that happens at the university level. The training does, but if these universities aren't getting the interest from students at a high school level, and they're only getting 3 or 4 people enrolling in a geoscience course, it's not sustainable to run that course. So we really need to look at that area. We were talking to some people the other day, literally about this. We have these superstar astronomers, such as Brian Schmidt, for example, a fellow of ours, but we don't really talk much about our superstar geologists. And unfortunately, I only got this idea 2 days ago when I was speaking to someone, so I haven't had time to go and find out who our, dare I say, rock star geologist might be. Sorry, that was a terrible joke, but I'm going with it. Yeah.
I think pun absolutely intended and for good effect.
But I do think that's actually what we need, and we need those people to be out in front talking about the work that they're doing and how that is going to lead to a better world. Because we know from talking to the students from the programs we run, both in high school and at university, the next generation really want to save the world. They are genuinely excited about how they can help make a better world. So they need to see that mining is not just a lucrative financial decision to make as a career, but actually going to help save the world. It's going to help produce the minerals to create the solar panels and the wind turbines and all of the electronics that need to go into the future. That's what we need to see happen. It's not a quick fix, unfortunately, because we're talking about inspiring people who are in their early teens, and by the time they become mining engineers, we're talking a 10, 15-year process, to be honest.
Peter, can I just make an observation? And this is a comment, and it doesn't reflect the attitude of the committee. It's a personal comment. But I think in the last 20 years, in a genuine approach to protect and preserve our planet, a great disservice has been done to the environmental and engineering sciences in that people have said we need, because the climate is changing and we do need to do things differently. Mining and things have been viewed through a critical negative lens. And I think that's actually done a great disservice to the planet, because we actually need the experts to do this really well. So, I'm hoping that we're now getting smarter about all of this, and rather than just saying we need to stop everything to make the planet better, we actually just need to do things better, because look at critical minerals and rare earths. They are the future of protecting our planet and us living more sustainably on it. But we still need to mine them, and we need to do that really well. So I think we're at a really important cultural intersection in the world at the moment, where people are actually starting to realise mining's not the enemy, and the geological sciences are super important for our future. So I'm really happy that these points are being raised. And Mr. McGarr, would you like to add? And I'm sorry, it sounds like I'm trying to direct, and just come to me. Yeah.
I'll move up the value chain. Sure. I think we've covered the geological sciences. Tick, 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 tick. I'll be quite brutal. Mining doesn't do a good job of positioning what actually happens within the industry as far as the level of technology, the level of new technologies, and the level of important roles that it's creating, certainly here in Australia. By way of my background, I led the Rio Tinto Innovation Group when we rolled out the first level of autonomy, artificial intelligence, machine learning, remote operations, and effectively we led the world. We don't actually position those really important jobs, and then also what we don't position is the knock-on ecosystem effect inside Australia. There's a group called Ostmine. You may not be aware of it. The effort was started under the Howard government. Ostmine is arguably the single greatest group of innovative, successful, high-technology startups and service companies in the Australian ecosystem. It employs multiple... So Ostmine looks after that group. It looks after what's called the MET sector, which is the mining, engineering, technology and services sector. And we dominate, and I'm going to use that word unashamedly, in many of the high technology infrastructure systems, and also for Perth. Perth is the software Silicon Valley of the mining industry. The jobs that we are bringing into our industry now are high technology jobs. They're machine learning jobs, they're artificial intelligence jobs, they're mechatronic jobs. The remote sensing that takes place in geology is akin to anything that NASA does with the gravity gradiometry and the flyby of the satellites. So we just don't position it. We remain silent. I sit on an advisory board for one of Australia's Geo8 mining schools, and it's a great school, and I'm really frustrated with it. They see it, but the industry itself does not do that. So when you're driving down the road and come to, I don't know, Parliamentary or those kind of companies, what you're not driving down the road and seeing on those billboards that are moving and in the feed systems, in the social media systems, is come to the high technology of the mining industry. One last closeout: the impact of artificial intelligence on the role of engineers in our society is going to be significant, and it is accelerating. I've been doing work with with the universities and also the professional engineering institutions in the UK, and also the roles of education and the amount of technology that's coming into our industry. We need to lead the industry with new technologies that are environmentally more sensitive, in fact, environmentally superior in their performance to what we've had in the past. And critical minerals, of this 31 critical minerals, half of those we are high geological. We have a high attractive geology. Of the rare earths, we have the monzonites. We have high geology attraction in there. And we can't keep, especially in the rare earths, we need to develop the high technology recovery systems to take the four important rare earths through to the metals and develop a process here in Australia that we can have shared tolling facilities, because individual mines are not going to be able to stand it on their own balance sheet. And we have the scientists, we have the engineers, we have the development, and if we can create the business infrastructure, the business case, we will attract the investors. I work on a venture capitalist investment fund that we are only focused on sustainable development investments in the mining industry. So publication, we've got to get into the minds of the wider population and the minds of those people coming in through the STEM degrees. We have to celebrate the success and the value add that this industry is creating. Not duck the sins of the past. The environmental legacies are there. We've got to fix them, and we've got to create a new technology pathway so we can add value for Australia.
Thank you, Mr.
I'll close that now.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Miss Michelle.
Yes, yeah. So this is like the whole employment thing, and the lack of engineers and skilled labourers is something that obviously affects my electorate quite a lot. We have a lot of coal mines in that area. And last term I was on an inquiry about manufacturing and the same issues there, where people think that these are, dirty jobs, that they're, out in the warehouse, hot, sweaty, whatever, but they just don't realise that these days it's you're in air-conditioned offices a lot of the time, or machines. A lot of it is, as you say, like there's a lot of innovation there. A lot of it's robotics these days also. So I think like the Minerals Council of Australia had actually been doing a bit of a advertising campaign of encouraging people of the benefits of the mining sector. And my son-in-law is a fitter, turner and machinist, and I've often said to him, you should go back to uni and become an engineer. And he said, I don't think I could do it, but he actually could. And I think that's part of it too, that sometimes people don't think that they have the capability of doing that. And, maybe when you've got these guys that are very skilled at what they do and need to go on to that next step, that we need someone sort of pushing them a bit to, go on to that next step to become an engineer and, have a very good future, because it's, they're very highly paid jobs as well. So, so I don't know. Do you think that there's a place there for maybe government to help a bit with advertising what's available in the mining sector, if you can become a geologist, an engineer or whatever, to help these kids, particularly in the city areas, to think that this is a good profession to go into? Because in the country areas, well, the regional areas where there's mining, kids are going into those jobs, but it seems to be the city kids that have got this, think that, mining's a dirty word, really.
Yeah, so a few years ago, ATSI released a report on a STEM skilled future that looked at a number of things, but one of them was very much looking at the area around engineering and how do we just get more engineers into the workforce. The reality is that we do need to actually do better at talking about why engineering is an exciting and an interesting career, and what it actually entails. That it's not necessarily you have to be the brilliant mathematician that decided I like building bridges. You can be someone who is a fitter and turner, who actually knows how to use all the machines already. And quite frankly, a lot of manufacturers and mines will tell you that someone who is a fitter and turner and become an engineer is far more valuable to them than someone who is just fresh out of university as an engineer, because they've got an understanding of how it works on the ground as well as the engineering. Our focus is very much on that, both the university and the high school level. So we run one program called Stellar, It was set up by Alan Finkel when he was our national president about 17 years ago, I'm hoping I've got that date right. And that's really focused on getting practical engineering experience into the schools across Australia. The goal is it's aligned with our science curriculum, so we don't have to create a whole new curriculum.
Okay.
It's designed in a way that provides teachers with the resources they need, so that if they're not an engineering teacher or a maths teacher, they can teach engineering with hands-on practical experience in a way that works for someone who's not an experienced engineer. Because I think that's the first point of where people fall out of the engineering pipeline is, if they have someone that's teaching them who's a brilliant teacher but isn't an engineer or a mathematician or a scientist, there's the nervousness that comes with that, and that tends to put people off. So that's one thing that we work on to try and help drive that. Yep. We provide that to schools, and we have a way that companies also donate to help provide those to schools as well. The next part is also looking at the people who don't typically become engineers and miners, and I'm talking very much about women especially. That is part of the workforce. If we're taking all of the interested men in mining, and we're already putting them into engineering and giving them jobs, and we need to find where's the untapped pool of resources. So this is not necessarily just a diversity question. It's just about numbers and workforce. Getting women into those programs is the way to do it. So we also, on behalf of the Australian Government, deliver the Elevate, which is a boosting diversity in STEM. And it's really not just about getting women in all of STEM, but those areas where we need the workers. So we're talking mining engineering, we're talking technologists, we're talking all of those things. Those are programs that we know, again, will take some time to work on it, but they are the opportunities to grow the workforce. In the meantime, as I said, we're talking 15 years down the track from high school onwards. Yep. Getting those people in there, I think a push from government, be they state or federal. I know that in WA there's always a push to get people into mining because that is an opportunity that's especially prevalent in WA. But the reality is we shouldn't just be training people in WA and Queensland and the big mining states. You're right, we should be training people in the inner city and saying, this is an opportunity to live in Perth, and I'm going to be very biased because I'm from Perth originally, an absolutely beautiful city. You know, you can come and have a lovely lifestyle. You don't have to be a fly-in, fly-out engineer. You can be someone who works in the city centre, who's doing remote mining and remote sensing and things like that. These are some of the newer opportunities that I think absolutely government could get behind, helping explain these opportunities to people.
Very good.
Mr McGarr, I wanted to add something there, and Miss Cook's in feverish agreement about Perth. I'd like it to be noted for the record.
Well, by the way, I lived in Perth for 7 years and also resided in the great town of Kununurra for 3. Look, let's try and think I think Peter's covered that very well. For people that are doing a trade now, that are trained technicians, there are routes through to become professional engineers. The world is moving towards lifelong education because the systems that we're using within our engineering world are changing so quickly. I was the past president, but it's a UK-based, of the Institution of Chemical Engineers. We had 40,000 members, and this was coming through. I'm very familiar with Engineers Australia here. So there is another pathway that we don't tend to promote that much, which is starting off as a technician and looking at what are the qualification modules that will be required to move up the professional qualification ladder. And it is not, and these things add value to the individual as they go through, and it's a lifelong learning approach that actually is taken up by other countries with more focus, but it's coming through here now. And it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that a technician could go through a lifelong learning modular approach overseen by the mining college in Engineers Australia and become a fully qualified professional engineer. And that other point I just want to keep stressing is lifelong learning. As the systems and the technologies are changing so quickly, is going to be a major focus for our country and all other countries going forward. What I learned when I did my degree would be, I've learned a lot through my life. If I did that degree again, it would be out of date.
No, thank you, Mr McGarr. I think that's one of the thought processes behind Fee Free TAFE, is that the more young people, not young, but all people we can get into TAFE, then hopefully they can continue that lifelong learning and micro-credentialing and all of these new things that are coming in. So I think that's a very good point to make. Mr Burnell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for providing evidence today. I just wanted to go back to the perception of the mining industry and some of your comments regarding potential barriers to participation for engineering pathways. I'm just keen to understand, has there been research that's gone and looked at young people leaving high school as to whether or not there is a specific factor stopping them from pursuing a science and a geoscience pathway?
I'm not aware of any specific research on that, but I can always get my team to have a look at it for you on the specificness of geoscience. I know the Australian Academy of Science recently looked at how many we're training and whether we're training enough, and they've found that we're not. But I'll have my team look at why geoscience specifically. For a more broad STEM focus, the answer we usually get is, and I can't quote for you the numbers, but the reasons we typically get is that I don't feel like I'm good enough at maths. I don't feel like science is for me. And there is also a perception that I think, and I'm going to be slightly critical of the STEM community which I am part of, in that we actually don't do a very good job of explaining to people the broadness of the careers that certain STEM degrees get you. I think this is where social sciences and humanities are actually quite good, because they explain to people that if you're doing a history degree, you're not necessarily going out to be a historian. You're developing all of these skills that actually can give you so many different opportunities. Whereas if you go in to be a chemical engineer, there's sort of an expectation you're going to become a chemical engineer. I was a zoologist and I'm doing policy and government relations, which I'm not going to talk about any of the connections there. But the reality is, I think we need to get better at talking to our students at a high school level, through our careers counsellors and the like, about the fact that you're choosing a career at a high school level, but the skills you're going to get at university and in TAFEs are going to set you up for more than just that narrow area. You know, if you're going into a STEM degree, you're learning data analytics, you're learning problem solving, you're learning how to look at things with critical thinking, and I think that's part of it. But the actual barriers for when they're leaving high school and choosing their degrees, I'm not sure. I can probably look into finding and take that on notice if you're okay with it.
I'm just interested to understand whether or not there's been research done in partnership with the Minerals Council, because it's not just geoscientists, it's also the engineering pathways as well. So, and I would have just thought that would have been something that was front of mind, that if there's a diminishing pool of participants in these study fields, that you'd want to understand the root causes to why people are not picking them up. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, there wasn't an issue with people signing on to those pathways. The other thing I wanted to touch on, though, was I noted here in recommendation 8 of your submission that you were talking about extend the paid prac placements to engineering degrees and incentivise enrolments. And what I wanted to ask in relation to that is, does industry do any professional development pathways for trade technicians, etc.? So a perfect example I can relate to personally, I spent 10 years in the offshore gas and oil sector. I was a maritime operator by trade. I did my marine operations trade certificate as a chief integrated rating. I would have loved nothing more than to transition across to a marine engineer, but because I didn't have technical qualifications, I wasn't accepted on that pathway. So I'm just interested to understand what pathway opportunities there are for people that are coming into the mining field, maybe as TAs, that then can work their way through into a more formal pathway of training that might be subsidised via their specific mining company that they may be working for. Yeah. Does that exist? And then is there a partnership between yourselves and that company?
So we don't have a particular... Actually, I'll backtrack a little bit. The other part about getting just sheer numbers in that you've mentioned that we haven't... The other part of it is actually also international students. So we have relied heavily on our engineering workforce to come from internationally. COVID saw a big drop in that, as you would expect. But we're also knowing that the rest of the world is going through the same things we are now. We're not the only country going through a clean energy transition. We're not the only country looking for critical minerals. So we're not going to find the international students coming across learning and staying to do the engineering jobs we need. So that's also where some of that dip has come from, and where we have to now actually do more than what we've done in the past domestically. And John's got his hand up, but I'll let him speak in a minute. On the pathways in, I know that universities have gotten better at providing those more broad pathways into engineering workforces, especially from those from trades. I think Anatzi's view is that we'd like to see better relationships between the vet sector and the universities. So I think it's almost a two-way street in that regard. So for a long time, vet is seen as a way into university, but frankly, there's also a lot of things that universities teach you that you could have a benefit for by doing a couple of vet courses at the same time. So if I look at, if I go back even to the mining engineering point, you know, having some of our mining engineers then go to do some vet courses on being fitters and turners at the same time, not a bad way to do things, but we just don't have that perception. We almost see it as a tiered system of you do TAFE and then you step up into university. We need to see more of that crossover between the two. As far as partnerships in industry, I think John probably has a better answer of that given his role at the universities. John?
I'll just back up a little bit, and the pathway from a technical role through to a professional qualification in the Australian context, I can give you chapter and verse for the European ones. It would be within the purview of Engineers Australia. Now, the Academy is having a meeting with Engineers Australia in the next couple of weeks. I need to look at my diary. So I'll take away a little bit of feedback that I think we can provide, Peter, is we'll have that conversation with Engineers Australia and see and report back. It'll be trust me, it'll be less than a one-pager to say, is this there and is it worth talking to? Because I thought that was an excellent question that was posed. It's a confusing world out there, and the clearer it can be made. But for professional registration in the Australian context, it is Engineers Australia, and they will be dealing with the universities because they effectively pre-qualify the syllabus. Now, as far as placements in industry are concerned, I cannot support that enough. Whichever way we can do it, there'll be light placements, there'll be heavy placements. Within my past roles in the innovation world, we were basically bringing in candidates and postdocs, so we weren't that much, because it was the technology that we're in. But to bring in, to expose yourself to industry, to have that exposure, and also it's got to be a two-way part. The industry partner has not got to be looking for cheap labour. I'm sorry, I'm summing up as blunt as I can. So there's a two-way agreement in that the person coming in is going to do a valuable role, but it's also going to be valuable to the employer, but also valuable to them. So that's probably something that a piece of policy work and I don't know who will do that, but policy guidelines, that would be very useful. I did 4 industry placements when I did my undergraduate degree, and I learned more there about how stuff works than. But those days have gone. That was in history. Okay, that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Mr. McGarr. Trish.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John. Thank you, Peter. Very interesting. I'd like, coming from Perth, of course, we lose a lot of our. Everybody knows somebody in their family or friends in their circle who is in mining. So to hear that, over there where Michelle is, that mining is the dirty word. I mean, in Perth and in WA, we're very conscious that mining.
It's not Central Queensland. But
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
The West is different about this, and I speak to Madeline King, the Resources Minister. There is just a different culture because it is such a massive part of your economy and your lives, quite frankly. And I think many of us are envious. I mean, in the Hunter we have a similar situation, but anyway, please, Trish, go on.
Yeah. So and occasionally we lose engineers to politics, like the member for Swan, Zanita, who's a chemical engineer. But what we have over here, of course, is the problem that our local utilities can't get the workforce because they've all gone to mining, especially around electricians and and tradies and so forth. But look, what I wanted to turn to was in your submission, you did highlight about e-waste recovery, and we just heard from the Minerals Council how it's such a lengthy process to dig up the dirt, 17 years on average. And of course, we want to focus on improving that, but I also would like to see those opportunities in e-waste recycling happen. Could you give us a picture of what is happening in that space and where the opportunities would most likely be, and what we can gain from developing that sector, and who is best placed to develop that sector? Is it government or is it industry? Thanks.
Thank you very much for the question, and it is I think a very important question, because as we all know that many of the critical minerals we're talking about aren't necessarily present in huge quantities, and some of them, as John will no doubt tell me in a moment, come as a byproduct of other mining processes, which is also important. So I think the e-waste space is really important. Australia is actually really good at recycling. From our construction fields, we recycle about 80% of what we use when we in construction and demolition. In the e-waste, we're not nearly as set up for that yet. So I think looking at how we set up the construction industry and demolition industry, that gives us a beautiful template of how to go forward. Obviously, e-waste is a little more complex, and that's where we get into almost two areas where we need to look into this. One is the research and innovation required to not just do the e-waste recycling, but to make it more commercially viable, because it's not going to ever become an industry on its own while it is still more economically viable to dig up the dirt. The other part of it is actually, and we did a report on this, which I'm happy to pass on to the committee afterwards, on setting up the things that we're mining for e-waste, is designing them from the start to be recyclable. Initially, we tend to create new products, whether they're solar panels, mobile phones, computers, to be made to be as effective and efficient and as cheap as possible so that the consumer will buy them. The area where the government can probably play a biggest role is requiring some of these new areas where we're really interested to actually be designed to be recyclable in the first place or reused in the first place. So investing in research and innovation that creates solar panels that are not just cheap and easy to make in China, but actually made in Australia and recyclable and something that we can then reuse. So preparing that in advance is probably the best way to do it. Again, it's one of those things where that idea would have been great 30 years ago when we were building the first round of solar panels, but we can only do what we can do until one of my brilliant fellows builds me a time machine. So I think those are the 2 points. The other part of it is data sharing is incredibly important in the e-waste industry. Being able to understand what is in all of these things and where the technologies are, that is something that Commonwealth Government especially can play a role in, is ensuring that information between those doing the recycling, but also those who are doing the designing and manufacturing of these things, are providing the information required to set this up. Then if we go to the actual e-waste or the mining of mineral tailings and things like that, that's another area where I know John works on leaching of copper. I think you said to me yesterday, John, or I've probably just put words in your mouth. Hey, I got it right. Look at me. On those opportunities to really look at where we've done the mining, we've got the tailings, but there's still valuable resources in those tailings. They may not be, again, as economically viable as the fresh resources, but they're still valuable and will become more valuable as we develop new technologies.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Trish. I appreciate that line of questioning. Ash.
Morning, everyone. Just a question, just reflecting on the opening remarks about graduates dropping from 300 to 100. I mean, 300 is pretty niche, I think, particularly with my background. I'm a scientist by trade, but really went in the world of human anatomy, cell pathology, and histology, which is also very niche as well. There's only maybe 13 odd body programs across the country, probably a team of 10. So that's also quite niche. So I kind of fell into it purely by chance through studying at Sydney Uni human anatomy. I think maybe the question is around, being so niche, is there, or maybe if you can give me some reflections around that creating uncertainty about going into a field of such, which is also probably playing a role. I'd love to know if you've got any thoughts around that. Maybe we'll start off with that.
Yeah, so I think the nicheness of... So some universities will tackle this issue with different ways. I know the University of Western Australia has now a broader degree program that then sort of gives you that broad education and then you move into mining engineering. The challenges with that is it creates, so the benefits is it creates more well-rounded students who can then be more flexible about their careers. The challenge is it means that it takes a bit longer to become an engineer because you're adding an extra year onto your degree. There are cost benefits to doing that sort of broad to narrow approach. But in reality, I mean, when someone goes into university or chooses their university degree, as you said, you sort of fell into your field. But I imagine if you go back to your thinking in high school, you were thinking, I'm interested in science, anatomy, biology.
Correct.
And then your first couple of years at university, then you fall into the specialist area that you're in.
Correct.
And I think that's where we need to be worried about where students are choosing their engineering. So if they're coming in as I want to be an engineer or I want to be a geologist, it's then whether they're going to become an exploratory geologist or a geoscience or a hydrogeologist, and that's where the nicheness comes into it. But I think the benefit is that most of the people who go into those fields, again, if we give them the right skills at that level, but also explain to them, and this is one area I think we can do much better, explaining to students what skills they've developed beyond the niche skills they've developed, it becomes much easier for them to switch careers. I went from computer science to zoology and reptile heart function to policy and politics. I think that's only because I am fairly flexible in what I've learned rather than focusing too much on the details, although if anyone wants to talk about reptile heart function, I'm more than happy to do that as well.
Now, politicians don't have hearts, so...
I'm not going to comment on that one.
We'll just take that as the chair's indulgence. Mr Derbyshire, thank you there, and Mr McGarr, thank you so much for your time today. It really has been a valuable conversation. Yeah, thank you. You will be given a transcript of your evidence for you to review to make any corrections to transcription errors. And there have been a couple of items that we've asked for on additional information. So the Secretariat will liaise with you, will liaise with you to let you know our timeframes around that. But sincerely thank you for your input into this inquiry, your excellent submission and your evidence given today. It really is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We will just suspend momentarily to let the committee to have a little break till 10:40. In my typical style of chewed into our break committee, I do apologise for that. kick off. I now welcome the representative of the Australian Aluminium Council to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thank you. My name is Margarita Johnson and I'm the CEO of the Australian Aluminium Council.
Thank you very much. And I would like to invite the committee to introduce themselves. We might commence with you, Mr Burnell, this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Matt Burnell, Federal Member for Spence, the northern suburbs of Adelaide.
Michelle Landry, Federal Member for Capricornia and Central Queensland.
And coming in virtually.
Hello, my name's Trish Cook. I'm the Federal Member for Bullwinkle, which is in the Perth Hills.
And I'm Ashan Behar, the Federal Member for Barton, which is in Sydney.
And Meryl Swanson, Committee Chair and Member for Patterson, and I have reason to have close dealings with Margie Johnson, so good to see you again, Margie.
Good to be here, albeit virtually.
Yes. Now, although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as the proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege, and I'll now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to questions and discussion.
Thank you very much. So the Australian Aluminium Council represents a resilient, competitive and sustainable bauxite mining, alumina refining, aluminium smelting and manufacturing industry that underpins Australia's economic strength, sovereign capability and energy transition. This integrated aluminium industry is essential to Australia's economy. Our industry delivers skilled jobs, supports regional communities and makes a significant contribution to national export earnings. The industry has been operating in Australia since 1955 and over the decades has been a significant contributor to the nation's economy. Earnings for the exports of bauxite, alumina and aluminium are expected to be around $18 to $19 billion over the coming years, and more than $14 billion of this comes from the alumina and aluminium industries as the value-adding mineral process. The industry directly employs more than 21,000 people and indirectly supports a further 55,000 people, predominantly in regional areas. And these are good jobs. On average, we pay $134,000, which is 63% higher than the national manufacturing average. Australia is a globally significant producer, playing a critical role in the global aluminium value chain, built on decades of investment, technical expertise and integrated capability. The industry includes 6 bauxite mines, making Australia one of the world's largest producers of bauxite. We're the world's second largest producer of alumina and largest exporter, with 5 alumina refineries across Australia. We're the 7th largest producer of aluminium, with 4 aluminium smelters on the east coast. And we also have more than 20 aluminium extrusion presses located in every state and territory except the Northern Territory and Tasmania. Aluminium is one of Australia's top manufacturing exports. But the global environment we find ourselves in has never been more competitive. Global aluminium supply right across that value chain and production are increasingly contested, making capable, sustainable, local operations more important than ever. As we noted in our submission, bauxite, alumina and aluminium are not currently included in Australia's critical minerals list, despite being on the lists of most of our peers and trading partners. And we urge this committee to recommend to the Minister that in the 2026 review of Australia's critical minerals strategy and list, that this position is reconsidered. Policy decisions made now will shape Australia's position in the global economy for decades to come. We all know that aluminium is essential to transport, infrastructure, construction, manufacturing, defence and emerging technologies, making it a strategic national asset. What must be recognised is how the bauxite, alumina and aluminium industry further underpins sovereign and industrial capability. We already facilitate the development and supply pathways of a number of critical minerals, including high purity alumina, gallium and fluoride. As the committee considers the factors shaping the social licence and economic development outcomes in critical minerals projects, It's important to maintain a broad view of not what only is considered a critical mineral today, but what should be considered a critical mineral in Australia's interests, and how existing industry provides not only examples of the valuable social and economic benefits available, but how we also directly facilitate new industries. Maintaining a resilient, competitive and sustainable integrated bauxite, alumina and aluminium industry will require reliable energy, long-term investment and policy settings that recognise the industry's strategic importance today, but also its potential to further unlock opportunities right across this country. Thank you, and I welcome any questions you have.
Thanks, Margie, for that. And look, I want to thank you for your submission, and I want to go straight to some detail of your submission. And there's a couple of areas that I want to broadly touch on, and I'll give you some indicators of that for you to think on. The first one is Indonesia's approach, because we're often scoping around the world looking for examples of where it's been done well or differently. So I'm particularly interested in that, and I do want to investigate with you as well today. Obviously, gallium is of particular importance. I note that one of the reasons this inquiry was stood up was because we have struck a deal with America in terms of critical minerals and rare earths, and I know that gallium is very high on the list of importance in that deal. So I'd like you to, and you've mentioned some other things, so I'd like you to speak to those if you can as well today, because I do think that's really important. So I'm just sort of flagging they're my areas of interest, and obviously the committee, other members will have their own areas of interest as well, but potentially let's kick off with those while I give my committee members some time. So, and I think we'll possibly come to you, Miss Landry, then we'll go to Mr Burnell and then Miss Amber Haberhart and Trish Cook in the West. So that we'll do it in that order, committee members, if that's okay with you. But Margie, if you can kick off firstly with that international example, being Indonesia, and then if you can speak more to the gallium and really in this remit of critical minerals and rare earths as it pertains to aluminium and why it's so important.
No worries. Thank you for the question. So I think it really is important. Your question on Indonesia would reflect some commentary that we provided in our submission, but also some information we've been providing to the government over a number of years. What we have seen in Indonesia, and this has been taking place actually for just over a decade, in terms of we have seen Indonesia have a different approach in terms of how they perceive their value-adding industry. So many people would be aware that Indonesia implemented an export ban on nickel ore, and that really jump-started the Indonesian domestic processing of nickel. And what we saw following that was which was very successful for the nickel industry in Indonesia, perhaps less successful for Australia's nickel industry.
So, Margie, can I just stop you there, just for the benefit of the committee? I just want you to explain. So, the Indonesians effectively banned imported nickel, didn't they? Is that?
They banned
yes.
the export.
Sorry.
They banned the export of unprocessed nickel. Would be how I would describe it.
From their own country, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Or, yeah, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so the nickel had to be value added to be able to export it. And what we have seen similarly, and I would note that the Indonesian government first did a bauxite bauxite export ban. That was trialled sort of around a decade ago, and it was probably a little bit too early in the development of the industry in Indonesia, and it wasn't a successful ban when they tried it first time around. But second time around, the Indonesians have banned bauxite exports since December 2023, and that has fundamentally changed the relationship between bauxite, alumina, and in the future aluminium. So basically, prior to that ban, Indonesia was an exporter of bauxite to the global markets. They now are an exporter of alumina and they are quite, what we would say in the industry, long in alumina. So they produce more alumina than they have sovereign capability to be able to process into aluminium. They have ambitions to be able to also produce aluminium and export that to the world. Importantly, not only did they actually ban the export, but they also provided a variety of other incentives to actually attract investment. So including tax breaks, a range of exemptions on machinery and equipment, and importantly also compared to Australia, streamlined licensing and approvals processes. Now, we are not in any way disputing Indonesia's right to, develop their own sovereign capability. Every country has the right to do that. It has spurred some fairly unprecedented activity. There's 3 new refineries due to begin operation in the last 12 months. We've got 3 more coming on in the next 12 months or so. So those expansions will increase Indonesia's processing capacity by about 500% in the next 5 years. I'll pause there to see if you wanted to pursue a different line of inquiry, Ms Swanson.
No, thank you. I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's very important that we understand some of our direct competitors in this space, and particularly with processing and value adding, which is it's a really interesting point. I mean, I'm sure I don't need to explain to the committee, but for anyone that may be listening, of course, the order of operations in aluminium production is that you mine the bauxite, you then refine it to alumina, and then you turn that alumina using a great deal of energy and expertise into aluminium. So I know our committee understands this, but there may be people listening wondering what the relationship is. And we are in a very rare and special circumstance in Australia where we have bauxite, we also refine alumina and produce the aluminium, and that is a very important point.
Yeah, and thank you, but I can just note, because obviously global geopolitics has changed since we did make our submission. So what we have seen is that the Indonesian producers, they are able to, particularly because of the very fast approvals processes, they can approve a bauxite mine and build an alumina refinery in a couple of years. The timelines is where it's taking for us just to do a bauxite mine approval, let alone not construct anything new, is in the order of sort of 5 to 7 years, even for the expansion of existing mines. So very different timelines, and they are able to enter with very low cost capability, which has already reshaped the alumina cost curve and put a lot of pressure on the rest of the global production. Again, not disputing, that's what happens when you bring in new capacity. What I would say is the geopolitics we face today is very different to what we had 3 months ago, just like the rest of the world. The global aluminium production has been cut by around 10%. Well, I should say the Gulf produces around 10% of global aluminium. They were, until February this year, a major importer of Australia's alumina. So the world was already long in alumina. We've then had a substantial decrease in aluminium production, and most of the alumina that supplied the Gulf region before February this year was Australia's alumina. So in a world where we're already long in alumina and alumina refineries are under a lot of pressure in Australia, we are now facing a situation where we're even longer in alumina, and there's a very decreased market for that alumina to be sold into.
Actually, just to get this on the record as well, please, Margie, because I think this is actually really important. Since the war in the Middle East commenced this year, can you give me a sense of aluminium production in the impacted areas? Do you have those figures? If you don't, you can provide them on notice. But I do think it's important for the committee to understand what's happening in that space.
So the Middle East produces around 10% of the world's aluminium. Well, it did do. What we have seen since the war began in the Middle East is we have seen some facilities have had to curtail that capacity, and those facilities We've seen that the production out of the Gulf has fallen about 40% since the war began. That includes curtailments in Qatar, in Bahrain, and in the United Arab Emirates, as well as in Iran. So we have seen substantial curtailments. The data from the International Aluminium Institute has shown that the production of aluminium in the Gulf region is down by around 11,000 tonnes a day compared to what it would normally be. Importantly for Australia, it is worth noting, as I said, until February, it was mostly our alumina that was supplying that region. So the impact for Australia has been twofold. One, it's really around the alumina that we would normally supply. Secondly, we would actually traditionally import some aluminium out of the Gulf to be able to supply some of our manufacturers that can't source the exact products they need domestically, and they are now challenged for import because of the loss of that production.
Okay, but presumably it puts us in a better position in terms of aluminium,
Yes.
finished aluminium being exported into a world market, though.
That's right. So our bauxite miners are doing it tough. Our alumina refineries are doing it tough. Our aluminium smelters, as you say, it's they are selling into a market which is demanding a lot of aluminium at the moment, and then our extruders. So we see this all the time where different changes in geopolitics actually impact all the different parts of our markets quite differently. They are different commodities.
Yep. No, thank you very much for that. I'm going to come to you. Who was going to go next? Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
You wanted to talk to gallium about
gallium. I do want to
talk.
I want to hear about gallium. So, yeah, thank you. Sorry. Thank you for that.
That's all right. Look, what I would say is, so when we mine bauxite grades are 30 to 50%. So by definition, when we take the alumina, so what I mean by that is alumina is 30 to 50% of bauxite grades. That's good compared to other metals where sometimes your grades might be less than 1% for some commodities. But for bauxite, it tends to be around 30 to 50%. By definition, that means that 50 to 70% is not bauxite. So it's other compounds that are in there. And we put a lot of energy, combine the bauxite with a lot of energy to make alumina. And we do that by dissolving the bauxite, or digesting is the technical term, into a caustic liquor. So we've already got the gallium, importantly, and other metals that are now dissolved into that caustic liquor in our alumina refineries. So the opportunity for gallium and potentially other things in the future, and I would say this gallium opportunity, as you noted, it was one of the background parts that triggered this inquiry. The opportunities for gallium, we didn't have this on our books as kind of a opportunity, sort of a couple of years ago. And we're looking at this potentially being in existence in the next couple of years. So, it's one of the amazing things about this industry is that we're starting to see the development of these ancillary opportunities. So having put all the energy into dissolving all of the bauxite, we've then got gallium in a relatively easily extractable form. Gallium is only found in very dilute concentrations, but because we've already done the hard work and dissolved it, it can then be separated out relatively easily, and I use that term slightly loosely, through ion exchange and extracted, and Australia now has the potential within the next couple of years to be a major global supplier of gallium, but essentially almost as a very valuable byproduct of the alumina refining industry.
And that is an important point to make, because if you weren't producing the liquor, if I can use that phrase, then we wouldn't have access to the gallium either. So this is what I'm trying to say is that the aluminium supply chain has enabled a rare earth or a critical mineral actually to be used and also benefited from. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Absolutely. And I would say that all the different bauxites around Australia contain different other compounds, so they're different geologies. So the opportunities are, something that we have been exploring for a long time, but we will continue to explore. So, who knows what example we will be talking about in 5 years' time.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Yes, thanks very much for coming online today. I just wanted to talk about in your submission about the high energy costs. We have aluminium manufacturing down at Gladstone, so have a little bit to do with it. But and just, you know, talking to people over the years and that, I had been told that there's some problems with exporting your product overseas if it's not used, if it's not created by renewable energy, like green energy. And I just wanted to know, you know, how you're getting around that, because I know it's very a product that uses a lot of electricity, and also with the processing in the different states, how are you going with the energy costings?
So as you say correctly, so both alumina and aluminium are energy intensive to produce. For both of those, energy would be 30 to 40% of the cost inputs. In the case of aluminium smelting, so aluminium, most of that energy is in the form of electricity, and the smelters in Australia have been supplied under long-term power contracts since they began. These smelters operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The smelter that is down in Tasmania has been operating continuously for nearly 71 years. So we don't turn off, we don't have a break, we don't have a day off in there. So energy is a substantial part of our cost base, and competitive energy is really a very symbiotic relationship with aluminium smelters. So the development of the location of the aluminium smelters tends to be where, when they were being developed, there was what we call stranded energy. So there was more energy than there was demand. You know, in the case of Bell Bay, back in 1955, the smelter started. So that is predominantly hydroelectricity coming from Tasmania. Then we also have smelters in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland that run on, you know, the grids in those states. So they were based predominantly on coal-fired electricity, as was the historic dominant source of electricity in those jurisdictions. Each of the smelters in Australia, and this is public information, the smelter in Tomago, its power contract ends in 2028. The smelter at Boyne ends in 2029, and the smelter in Portland ends in 2035. They need to renegotiate new contracts in order to be able to continue to operate. Boyne is probably the one that's easiest to describe because it is very publicly on the record that Rio Tinto has been working hard to develop around 4 gigawatts of new renewable capacity in order to be able to underpin the continued operation of that facility. And that has been part of that cost of that has been supported by both the federal and state governments. But that gives that smelter an opportunity to transition to renewables. Tomago announcements have been made, but we haven't seen the full detail. But what I would say is that you do have the opportunity to fundamentally transform the grids in the regions in which we operate, in the Hunter Valley and in the future Portland, so in the greater Victorian area, and even in South Australia is where sort of Portland draws its power from in terms of that. Going to the part of your question about the green electrons versus the non-green electrons. So smelters need electrons. We are already fully electrified. That's a huge advantage for us compared to many other industries. Being already electrified means we're not dealing with the technology challenge on the smelter side. More than 40% of global production of aluminium is already from renewables. So it's not a question of whether we can export or not. We can export all our aluminium today, and we will be able to export our aluminium into the future. There is some discussion over whether or not there'll be a green premium. So will we get paid more for that aluminium if it's green? We haven't seen a huge green premium in the market so far, but that is in part because the demand for that greener product doesn't exceed supply. As I said, you've already got more than 40% of aluminium is produced on renewables globally. So there's quite a lot of aluminium which is produced on hydroelectricity is the biggest source. But what is important to note in Australia is obviously the coal-fired power stations upon which our industry was built are ageing, they're becoming less reliable, and they are closing. So we need to replace it with something. And the most economic, in our view, economic near-term opportunity is renewables. They do need to be firmed by storage, and they do need to be firmed by gas. So it's not going to be a 100% renewable solution, but it will have a higher penetration of renewable electrons than we have had historically.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for providing evidence today. My question, I guess there's no question about the significance of our critical mining strategy. What I am interested in to understand is the case for overriding like commercial and environmental social considerations with a priority view towards mining critical minerals, and how do we balance that through the framework from a legislative point of view to try and speed up processing times so that you can explore or dig out what minerals you need to dig out? You talk about in your submission about the need to to speed up the approval timeline.
Okay. Yeah.
But how do you get the social and commercial balances right so that you're not running roughshod over other vested interests in the same space?
Yeah. So I just wanted to clarify, when you say overriding, that we're not seeking. Yeah, so we're not seeking to have, we're seeking to make sure that Australia's environmental approval system, as was legislated last year through the EPBC reforms, what we are seeking is that those environmental approvals, I think everybody agrees that the environmental approvals in Australia for all projects, whether that's a new housing development or a new mine, that the environmental approvals process is taking too long compared to our competitors. It's taking too long to be able to build new houses. It's taking too long to be able to get mining projects up. That environmental approvals process is too slow for everybody today. It's too slow for commercial decision making. We are not seeking to be able to have, we're not seeking to shortcut the process for our projects. We're not saying our projects should have a shortcut. We should still be going through the process. But what the government did through the EPBC reform is we need to get there, and what needs to continue to happen is we need to actually have a much better ability to do things like bilateral approvals with the states and the territories. At the moment, essentially, you're doing the same process twice, and it is not efficient for anybody. So it's not a question of saying we don't think that we should be subject to the same environmental approvals or social licence approvals, but it is to say that that just needs to be faster for everybody, not just for us.
I think that was evidence that was taken this morning from the Minerals Council, basically saying exactly that the bilateral processes in some places aren't working, and only 38% of projects from the Minerals Council perspective were going through that bilateral process, and it's as a government, I know we are working to streamline that, but it sounds to me the evidence is very clear. Everyone is saying the same thing, that this is all just taking too long, and in respect to critical minerals, we really are going to have to make some changes.
I think so, and I think the other important thing is, and again, that goes to my point in terms of what is considered a critical mineral, because at the moment, if that set of changes only applied to critical minerals, it would not apply to bauxite mining or alumina refining or aluminium smelting. Right. Which would mean that we would not be able to extract gallium, process high purity alumina, fluorite, all of which are critical minerals. So it doesn't quite make sense if we think about it in that context. The other thing is going back to, I guess, Ms Landry's question on, say, energy and decarbonisation. The other thing is that we actually need to be able to invest in the next wave of infrastructure at our facilities. For example, at an alumina refinery, what we're looking to do is to, over time, replace the coal-fired boilers that exist at a lot of the alumina refineries today with either a gas or an electric boiler. That's the next stage of technology. When they get to the end of their life, just like a coal-fired power station, they're about 25 years for a boiler. We want to be able to invest with certainty in that next piece of infrastructure, but we'd prefer to move to either gas or electricity where that is economically available. But that investment decision also needs to be matched by knowing that we will have access to the bauxite on the same type of time frame, because those commercial decisions have to go hand in hand. So it is not to say we're shortcutting, it is just to say we're being efficient with how we're managing regulatory process in Australia.
So just for clarity, so is there a specific type of reform that you would like to see to try and harmonise between state and federal jurisdictions to accelerate the decision-making process?
So the EPBC reforms aim to do that on bilateral approvals. We think that prioritising that bilateral pathway should be a priority under the EPBC reforms.
Right. Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Ash, coming to you.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you so much for your contributions this morning. I wanted to ask a question really around workforce and skills. Are you able to sort of give some reflections or commentary around what those challenges are, for the workforce in that industry? And yeah, we'll start with that.
Yeah, I think the opportunity for skills in and workforce in some ways in bauxite, alumina and aluminium is we, like many parts of industry, we already face some shortages for particular skills. And if we look particularly at transformation in the future, basically we're a STEM industry. We are science, engineering, in practice, every part of our value chain, because we do so much value adding. And what we need to do is to make sure that the sort of skills that we're going to need are particularly electrical skills, engineers, electricians, process control engineers, analyzer technicians, electrical vehicle mechanics, all sorts of things. And that demand is going to occur for everyone across the whole economy, and we'll need to try and attract them into our sector as much as anything. As I said earlier, this sort of industry has got very good salaries, very good conditions, and we offer long-term and in many cases intergenerational employment opportunities. And we do have a mixture of fly in, fly out, but predominantly, only a little bit of FIFO. We are very predominantly a residential-based workforce, offering a range of opportunities. But that challenge we have around the right skills is really a challenge that Australia has about how do we get the talent we're going to need. And that really starts with high schools in terms of, getting people, and particularly to get a diverse range of people. So we have access to 100% of the workforce, men, women, but other diversity to make sure that we have access to the skilled labour we need. I would just note in regions, particularly on Cape York, we have a number of bauxite mines. And in those regions, we have Indigenous participation rates often of above 30%. And we do that using a mixture of things. So we have some mines that are fly in, fly out, and some of those, one mine that is fly in, fly out, they will literally go and collect workers who live in communities from anywhere on Cape York. They will go and they match their roster to help make that work for people who want to continue to live in communities, but transfer to work. Or we also have huge residential opportunities at other mines on Cape York for people who prefer to go home at night. So it's just a real mix depending on that. So we do have, but getting that diversity is a huge part of what this industry can have to offer.
Great. Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you. We'll come to you, Trish. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita. Nice to meet you. Look, in WA here, we have a few operators within the Northern Jarrah Forest, within our Jarrah Forest, and within particularly in the northern part, which really impacts on metropolitan Perth and my electorate here. There's been exploration. I'm sure you're familiar with all that. I'm not sure if the rest of the committee are, but there's been a lot of contentiousness around this because of the claim that the environmental restoration of a Jarrah forest, which is one of 38 global hotspots in the world, is just not being able to done. How do you respond to that?
Well, I obviously can't comment on the very particular, very particular set of claims that relate to that. What I would say is bauxite mining is very well suited to what we would call progressive rehabilitation. So in some cases, in certain mining types, you would have a deep pit, and that deep pit would be open for 30 or 40 years, and then you would come back and you would rehabilitate it at the end of that mine life. Bauxite is different in that it tends to be found in shallower layers closer to the Earth's surface. And because of that, we would tend to be able to remove the topsoil, undertake the mining, and replace the topsoil sometimes within the same year, sometimes within 1 or 2 years of it being removed. So we are actually undertaking progressive rehabilitation, and we are putting back rehab, as we call it, at a rate at which other mining types perhaps haven't even got to the end of their life. So I understand some of the challenges that are associated with operating in these areas. But I would also say this industry has undertaken a huge amount of rehabilitation over many decades. Has it always been easy? No. But we are actually undertaking rehabilitation, whereas I said, and I'm not criticising other mining types, it's just a different mining type that other mining types may not have even got to because they're not yet sufficiently through to the end of their life.
I guess, excuse me, Margaret, I guess the claim is that the Jarrah forest in particular need bauxite to be a healthy Jarrah forest. What's your perspective of that?
I have seen those claims. I am not a Jarrah forest scientist, so I will not comment on the validity of those claims because that would be going, I guess, beyond my scope. But I think it is important, like our members do, we live and work in the communities in which we operate. We're not, as I said, that's a residential, they are all residential operators. So it's not that our members are looking to, we are very much part of those communities and we recognise the value of those communities. We also recognise the changing values within some of those communities since we started operating. And we do, that is, it's not something where we're aiming to come in, and we're not coming in and operating for a few years and leaving again. These are long-term operations that have been there for 60 years, as you're aware. So it's not, and we're learning, but we do spend a lot of time and money on research and science to make sure that we are doing the very best thing for the environment and the communities in which we operate. There's always a balancing act. I'm not going to pretend there's not. There's always a balancing act. I would also say aluminium will need to be mined from somewhere. Now, that isn't to say we should, we need to ignore environmental protections, but aluminium, the global demand for aluminium is set to almost double by 2050. That means we're going to need the bauxite and the alumina to support that growth, and that bauxite growth will be coming from somewhere. It will be coming from Indonesia, it will be coming from Guinea, or it will be coming from Australia. Australia has some of the highest environmental standards in the world, and we support them staying to be very, very high. We're open to challenging conversations, and I'm sure my members that operate in the Northern Jarrah Forest are happy to have, very specific discussions if you would like to have a specific meeting with them. As I said, I'm not a research scientist, so I won't offer a research scientist's opinion.
Thank you.
Thanks, Trish, and thanks, Margie. In the time that we have left, and we're rapidly running out of time, but I just did want to get to the fluorine issue that you've noted in your submission, Margie. Can you just maybe, and again, we are rapidly running out of time, but I do think it's worthwhile getting some of this on the record. Can you just speak to the fluorine that you've mentioned in your submission, because I think this is a worthwhile thing.
Thank you. And I did have the privilege just last week of visiting the pilot plant, which is being constructed in northern Tasmania, and has the potential to deliver initially 10, and then hopefully if it can move to full scale, 100 full-time jobs in northern Tasmania. And I know that that would be very welcome in that community. So to make aluminium, we need to use a product called aluminium fluoride. The easiest way to describe this is it's a bit like the AdBlue of diesel. You don't know that you need it until you don't have it, and then it turns out it was very important. So we use aluminium fluoride. Australia is the world's largest producer of aluminium that does not have domestic supply. So every other country that produces aluminium bigger than us, they all have their own domestic supply of aluminium fluoride. So fluoride traditionally comes from a product called feldspar, and that is running out globally. An Australian company has worked out how we can take what is currently a byproduct of the industry, aluminium smelter bath, which is rich in fluoride, extract that fluoride and be able to put that back into our smelters and essentially create sovereign supply, which would supply Australia's smelters, but also some of our near neighbours, like the New Zealand smelter, that also doesn't have supply. And I guess as an example, a further example of why I think it's really important for this committee to have a broad understanding and definition of not just what's possible today, but what might be possible in the future. The company I know started this project with aluminium fluoride supply in mind, supplying the smelters. Turns out fluoride is also needed to turn rare earth ores into rare earth metals. So maybe that fluoride that can be produced in Tasmania could be combined with some rare earth ores out of Western Australia, for example, to be able to make, instead of just producing rare earth ores domestically, maybe we can make rare earth metals and further value add domestically in Australia. So I couldn't have given you that example 6 months ago. It's a new thing, we are constantly evolving, we're constantly doing that research, and this is Australian grown technology being developed and deployed in Australia. The opportunities to develop not just what we believe bauxite, alumina and aluminium should be considered critical minerals, but to develop additional supply chains from that beyond the gallium, the high purity alumina and the fluoride. We need to keep the backbone strong, and we will have those opportunities in the future. And hopefully we will be having those 100 full-time jobs in northern Tasmania.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for your evidence today and your attendance to the committee. You will be given the opportunity to review the transcript and make any corrections to errors. But look, thank you so much for your time and, importantly, for your excellent submission.
No worries. Thank you. Thank you, committee.
Thank you.
We'll just suspend momentarily while we welcome our next guests. Thank you. We'll recommence. I now welcome a representative from the RDA Goldfields Esperance to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Yes, thank you. I'm Sharon Henderson and I'm the Regional Development Australia Goldfields Esperance Director of Regional Development.
Thank you very much. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And just before we invite you to make an opening statement, Sharon, I'd just like to give the committee an opportunity to introduce themselves, and I'm going to kick off with Miss Cook because she's coming from the West.
Hello, Sharon. I'm the federal member for Bullwinkle, which is in the Perth Hills, incorporating some regional areas as well.
Down the road.
Yes. And to you, Ash?
My name is Ash Ambihapaha, and I'm the federal member for Barton, and my electorate is just south of Sydney Airport.
Excellent. We'll go to you, Michelle.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michelle Landry. I'm the federal member for Capricornia and Central Queensland.
And Matt Burnell, federal member for Spence, the northern suburbs of Adelaide.
And Meryl Swanson, committee chair and member for Paterson, which is roughly 2 hours north of Sydney in the beautiful Hunter and Port Stephens areas. And look, thank you for being here today. I'd now like to give you the opportunity to make an opening statement before we proceed to questions and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for the opportunity to appear. So, of course, Regional Development Australia Goldfields Esperance is part of the National RDA Network, which is an Australian government initiative, and our role is to be an independent, evidence-based regional voice. So what I bring you today is drawn from my targeted survey of the critical minerals companies operating in our region and our own economic research. So this is a view from the ground. And you know, it is the ground I come from. I'm fourth generation Kalgoorlie resident. So for 40 years, I've lived less than 500 metres from a still active gold mine shaft. My father, his three brothers and my mother's stepfather all have worked in the nickel and gold industries in Kalgoorlie and Kambalda between 1967 and 97. So it's not just history. My brother, my sister, several nieces and nephews work in the industry today. So when I talk about what it means to live alongside this industry, about social licence and about communities that depend on mining across generations, I'm not speaking in the abstract. I've lived with the realities of it, and not only the benefits, you know, the poppet heads on the skyline and the shift whistles, the blasting you feel as much as here, and then of course everything then now is open cut, but you've still got underground. But it's taught me that living alongside this industry is real, with real impacts on the people who do it, and that's why I don't take it lightly and I don't dismiss mine, because that same industry built my family and my town. So I think it's exactly the balance that I wanted to strike in my submission, that social licence isn't automatic. It depends on that visible local benefit and coordinated planning. I wanted to start with why this region matters, because Goldfields Esperance, it's not a prospective frontier, it's operational, expanding, multi-commodity critical minerals province. And I mean, it's producing today at this world ranking scale. The energy transition essentially is physically as a minerals transition. I know that the International Energy Agency estimates that the volume of critical minerals the world needs to meet that net zero actually outstrips current global supply. And for lithium alone, the IEA projects a supply gap of about 40% by 2035. And lithium is the mineral Western Australia leads the world in. And they're also clear there's no shortage of resources in the ground. The challenge is bringing that supply online responsibly, and then at a national scale. That's exactly our regional message. The constraint's not geology, it's the coordination of it. So to put some scale on it, Goldfields Esperance covers nearly 1 million square kilometres. You know, there's 58,000 people, supports about 38,000 jobs. A lot of that is FIFO. And it generates close to 40 billion in annual economic output. Mining contributes more than 10 billion a year, over 16,000 direct jobs. So it's our dominant economic driver in our region. And, you know, we are a single commodity region. We've got rare earths, we've got lithium, nickel, cobalt, graphite, scandium. We've got high purity alumina, and a lot of these are aerospace and defence metals. And then, of course, we are anchored by our deep water port at Esperance. And, of course, you know, really it is a mature mining services sector. So, you know, that diversity in that one whole area, it's itself a reduction in sovereign supply risk, if I can say it that way. So in our submission, which, of course, you've read, makes 7 recommendations, but I want to draw out really 3 that matter the most. And, I mean, these aren't not just me and the RDA in the region asking alone. It seems to be a united Western Australian position shared by industry and the state. And we would like to be firstly recognise Goldfields Esperance as a nationally strategic multi-commodity critical minerals precinct. I mean, you know, it's a defined unit for coordinated infrastructure, workforce and approvals, really the way that the Northwest Minerals province is treated. And I mean, you can't plan a corridor or a training pipeline for Australia, you plan it for a place. And then second, co-fund integrated common user infrastructure. I mean, our priority bottlenecks are the Port of Esperance, which really, you know, they know it's 60 years old even now, and it needs to be bigger. The basin's got to be bigger. It has to be prepared for the infrastructure. Energy reliability, and certainly we live on one Swiss energy grid. Transmission and water security, because we have the water pipeline. Critical minerals are low volume and high value. No single project can justify a port or a transmission line, but the whole area can. And this is about enabling the infrastructure. I mean, we've got our rails and roads connecting remote deposits to processing and to export ports. And we're reinforcing that the state and the Commonwealth do need to work together. And then third, housing and workforce investment to the project pipeline, and also keep empowering and embedding our First Nations participation from the start. Now, we all know you've heard this for weeks. Housing and project pressure, and there's binding constraints. And without housing built ahead of the construction peak, we have to do fly in, fly out and cap. And then, of course, there is the local benefit loss. The strongest opportunity in a region is our First Nations economic participation. And if it's embedded from the exploration and properly resourced, not just bolted on the end, it shows it works. Joel, at Liontown at Kathleen Valley, you know, Lina spend more than 40 million with First Nations businesses around Mount Weld near Laverton. So, I mean, in closing, RDA works closely with all the three tiers of government. And then, of course, the state leads. The Commonwealth's role is to enable the infrastructure and line the programs. So industry, the state, and the region's asking the same things. We want to keep, Goldfields Esperance is going to keep anchoring Australia's critical minerals capability, and we're going to share that prosperity, but only if coordination, infrastructure, workforce and housing keep pace. And I think this is where your inquiry and your community is going to make a difference. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I'm happy to take questions, and I hope I can help you.
Excellent.
Thank you.
And Sharon, if I may, I just want to commend you on your submission. It was really great. You know, often we get very long submissions that, and they're of value as well, but yours was really targeted. And I'd like to commend you on your map, you know, because it gave us a really great snapshot of the area and what you do. And, you know, sometimes that's important, because if you're reading a submission and then you've got to go out of that and go and sort of look, now what are we looking at in what area and how does this all piece together? You captured it really well, so thank you. And your information has been excellent. I do want to go to the point that you raised in your opening remarks about having lived and breathed social licence, and it's something that that we share. But I come from a coal mining family of intergenerational coal mining, so, and I live today less than, well, about a kilometre, about half a kilometre actually, from an open cut coal mine. So I understand, and it was an an underground pit before that. So I get it, but I'd just like you to talk to us, because one of the big things is social licence. Now, clearly, you've mentioned traditional owners, you've mentioned the economic opportunities of getting in early with traditional owners, and we've also heard that evidence this morning. So this is not just an exercise, if you like, in getting the approval from traditional owners, but this is having them benefit, you know, economically, socially, from being part of it. There's so much opportunity, and so I'd like you to sort of expand on that, if you don't mind, because I do think you are in an exquisite position. You know, we don't get an opportunity to really talk to people who are living and breathing this. So can you just give us a little bit more about how, as a committee, you've made some great recommendations. We're going to take those on board, but just talk us through what does this actually look like? How do we, get, and not just traditional owners, but all communities to benefit from this? And it is an incredible opportunity.
Absolutely, and it's to say, I live and breathe it, and I do have a background from working from a Chamber of Commerce 3 years before this for 7 years, and then in the banking industry. So, I mean, I've lived in this in various levels, and if I can talk about all business as such, it's very important straight from the start that whenever any mining is proposed, any major project really, that for a start that they sit there and think, okay, I know that I'm going to start trying to get my mine established. So if I put it that way. But I know that the idea of getting my mine established is because I want to make money. I mean, this is the company, let's be real here. But in doing that, then I also need to think that there has to be a case where I sit back and think, I need to make sure that I involve people in the journey with me. I need to look like that I'm using the local businesses and the local companies. But in my opinion, it is a lot better now than what it was 40 years ago. And I do think that it is because in the past there wasn't this social licence to make sure that you do the right thing by the community for the governance, to make sure that you do the right environmental things. You cannot just start a mine up and start drilling holes now. You have to cover the area up because you have to be aware that there are people around in the community. And the same thing, you have to be aware of who is there. I'll go back to the businesses. So the potential is there for our First Nations businesses. They are very, very engaged in our region when they come to looking after the water cartage, the haulage, keeping the lands cleared. They understand what is in there in that area when it comes to the animals that need to be looked after and things like this. The problem is that the mining companies need to know where do they go first to engage with these people. And in the case of up in Laverton, then the communities already had a very strong base when they were with the local governments. And I think that's where it actually starts. There are a lot of, there's now a local business chamber, an Aboriginal business chamber in Kalgoorlie, which is actually very, very helpful. And they've only been going for 5 or 6 years and they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I found that what's happened is a lot of the mining companies have recognised that they need to engage with them, support them and sponsor them. And that is where they're getting the bulk of the First Nations representation there. But in the same time, there has to have been this other work in the background, which has been to help those businesses expand. And that's where the federal has come in with the OS industry and Aboriginal component industry from that, and helping them to form their businesses right from the start. I hope that's helping. I think I might have gone off topic.
No, that's okay. So what I'm picking up from you is that we are seeing an emergence of Indigenous business of chambers of commerce and business chambers. In fact, I have one in my area, and they're doing a magnificent job too. So it was brought to our attention this morning in evidence given this morning that sometimes there's capacity issues with our traditional owners' organisations, and my understanding of what was meant by that is that when we're constantly going back and seeking consultation location, and if there's many projects that are potentially going to one or two organisations, it can be a drain on people. You know, they're trying to participate in ongoing consultative processes. So I thought that was an interesting point as well. But I'm hearing from you today that it's not only potentially layoffs but it's also emerging groups like Indigenous business chambers. So there are other peak bodies that we should be also working with, and companies should be working with in seeking social licence. Have I understood you correctly?
Yes. And I think that's my own brother, until recently, he was working with two First Nation businesses, and he's a heavy-duty diesel fitter, and he was helping them establish workshops in our city in Perth because he had the experience. Because what he sort of said too was that they didn't have the capability to understand how to expand. They had an idea, but they still needed to have somebody who's got industry experience to come and work with them and to explain that they can expand even more than just being the people that drive the trucks and water the grounds. And that's not a bad thing, because you need that to get the dust down. But then also that then they can actually then go and actually start learning, how do I become a mechanic? How do I go to the TAFE and things like this? And then how do I actually look at then moving into the next spot, selling the equipment? Okay. So sometimes you do need to get that experience from people who are in the industry.
And that's all part of that capacity building as well, so it's a twofold thing.
Yes, yeah, okay. Yes.
Trish, would you like to pick up a line of questioning, please? Thank you.
Yes, please. And Sharon, I made the point earlier that in WA, everybody knows somebody in their family that's been in mining. My brother's still in mining. I've been in mining. In fact, I lived in Kalgoorlie for 4 years and taught OC Health and Safety at the local TAFE there. So I totally get that, you know, how important this region is, and it's great to see that, you know, the expansion with critical minerals is going to bring a lot of fresh, fresh blood to the area, I guess. I did drop out for a minute there and I had to log back in, so I might have missed it when you talked about your 3 points of your submission that you wanted to highlight, and then I heard you mention housing at the end. So forgive me if I'm sort of going back over what you've said, but, you know, in the olden days, in the earlier days of mining, the mines would build the towns and then build the mine, and they would provide housing for their workers. Panawanika, where I lived and worked for 3 years, totally closed mining town. Newman, Karratha, they were all those towns were established. But when I was in Kalgoorlie, Esperance, not so much. It's just left to private developers to develop housing, which we know literally hasn't worked in the cities, and I can imagine that's only worse in the regions. So, you know, is that something that mining companies, I know they rely on FIFO workers now, and that doesn't necessarily keep the money in the towns. It doesn't build up that social connection. You know, they lose a little bit of social licence every time they import the FIFO workers in and out, you know, because they're not townies. What do you advise businesses in regards to housing, and is there any appetite for the mining companies themselves to provide housing?
Well, the thing is, the mining companies are providing housing here, but at the point that they may not purchase the house, but they are actually renting the houses. But they're renting houses that are 5-bedroom houses, and they put 1 worker in them. So then what that means is that we're having a huge problem being able to attract people into the region, that we want to not just fill those mining jobs, we want them to do all the nursing jobs and we all know we all want GPs and so that, but of course all those other industries, aged care providers and things. And the only choice has been to allow mining camps to be established, even within the town. The mining companies have purchased many of our caravan parks. We've actually had another one built. Now, we were hoping that by them building these camps, and this has been a local government decision to allow this to actually occur, that it would free up these houses in the market, because we've got less than 1% vacancy rate for the thing. And also with houses, there are a lot of houses. It's only houses that are on the cheaper end of the spectrum, not those larger ones that are actually available to purchase. So it's actually happening quite slow. The thing, and I mean, I think you might be familiar because you have come from Kalgoorlie. You remember East Kalgoorlie, Williamstown?
Mm.
So that's where I lived, which Williamstown was purchased. The mining companies realised that they had to offer a package to us after 40 years of mining, and that was quite a significant payout. And, you know, there was a process to go through it, and this occurred back in 2022. And
So
I want you to imagine
that housing that you're talking about, though, for the camps, they're literally for the FIFO workers for when they're there. They're just temporary camps. They're not like ongoing family housing.
No, they're not. And the intent, though, is that those houses that they've built, these mining camps, or you know, where they bought out the caravan parks, the problem is that we're still getting more FIFO workers coming in, filling those, and then those houses that they've been renting to the staff are still not. They're still getting rented to the staff, so it hasn't freed it up.
No. So going forward, for critical minerals in this region to further develop, housing is crucial, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also you've got to think too, even for building houses, we've only, say, got 5 companies that actually can build. And we've got land that's getting released. However, the land is actually in the higher end of the spectrum for people to purchase to build. And, of course, you've got to think you've got to put the infrastructure in and to build, you know, you've got to have – at one stage it was too expensive for the companies to even think about building, because you had to put in all of the plumbing and all of the electricity and things like that to get it ready. But it still doesn't stop. People still want to build a house. There's no reason. But we're still looking at about 12 to 18 months from a start to finish of a house build.
And Chair, if I could, I just wanted to talk to you, Sharon, about competing land uses down there. Is that a problem for you? I know there's wheat and sheep sort of farming areas. Is that problematic, or is there kind of a happy balance out that way?
No, there really is a balance. We don't have, I mean, pretty much it's been exactly the same as what it's been from the start to finish. So if you think you've got your mining leases further right up north, and yet they might be on a cattle farm, and then of course as you further go down, you've got your sheep and your agriculture and whatnot. So no, we're very slow though when it comes to putting in all the energy infrastructure. You know, the wind turbines, they are really only down in the Esperance region. We don't have many at all. The mining companies themselves on their mining sites, so they're the only ones who are actually converting to clean energy, and that's because it's cheaper for them.
Right.
But you would imagine that we should have solar panels everywhere, because we have literally 300 days of sunshine over, 20 degrees.
Yes, exactly. Great. Thanks, Sharon.
Excellent. Michelle?
Yes, okay. Thank you for coming online today. I probably wanted to follow up a bit on what Trish was saying with the housing, but also about how you can actually get the workers in town. And I'm from a coal mining community, so we have the same issues there. And I think, a lot of that comes down to the lack of infrastructure with like doctors, schools, sporting facilities and all that sort of thing. So, the wife and the kids stay in Perth, and then you get the workers doing the FIFO. So I think that is an enormous problem. I was just going to say we've got outside of Rockhampton a mining town called Mount Morgan, and it's a gold mine, and it's actually started BP from all the gold. Anyway, it was closed for like, I don't know, about 30 years or something, and they just walked out and left it, and the whole town went to pieces. Anyway, a group called Heritage Minerals has just reopened that, and all those local people have got jobs there now, which I think is really, really significant, and just goes to show how much those mining projects do actually, support your local communities. So can you, with your, is it saying that about the shortage of workers and skills and all the rest of it, can you see that moving forward at all, that, perhaps that the infrastructure will be put in place more with more schools, medical facilities and all the rest of it, or do you think it'll just continue as more FIFO?
No, I think FIFO's thing. Like for Kalgoorlie-Boulder, because that, of course, is the centrepiece, they've always had a dream to get to 50,000 people. And, I mean, we probably do have 50,000 people, but we sit on 30, but the other would be the FIFO. Much as I would personally like to see that we would get more, certainly expand the hospital back from a health campus back up to a hospital, it's not going to happen. I don't believe it's going to happen.
Right. That's it.
Thank you there. Ash, did you have a line of questioning? No, okay. Look, Sharon, I really have appreciated talking to you today, as I know the committee has. We're very grateful, and particularly for your excellent submission. So are there any other things today that we haven't asked you about that you would like to just again reinforce? I pick up the 3 points from your recommendations, but is there anything that you sort of want to close with? Because I just want you to feel as though you've had the opportunity. You live in an extraordinary part of the country, and clearly the opportunities are huge, and you are doing it well, and you've got that benefit of history, and this is how we are going to maximise the benefits from this new wave of critical minerals and rare earths, is being able to use experience like yours. So is there anything that you'd like to leave us with?
Look, I'd just like to say that we're in an incredibly prosperous place, and even though that it is prosperous, you've still got people who are working in that region to support the people that are earning higher incomes. Not everybody is a diesel fitter, but a worker that's in the local Hungry Jacks is just as important as that person who's working in the mine, because if we didn't have them helping us, doing those jobs. So I think there's a place for everybody here, and I do feel that nickel is coming back, and will be certainly we're going to be positioned quite highly, I think, within the world.
Excellent. Now, look, again, thank you so much for your submission and for your attendance here today. We will be sent a transcript of your evidence, and you'll get the opportunity to request any corrections to transcription errors. But I really thank you for your time and your excellent submission, and I feel as though we're all much better informed for it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon.
And I just want to thank the members of the committee for staying back on a Friday today and working through the inquiry. It really is gratefully received by myself as the chair, and I know the Secretariat, so thank you for doing that. I'll declare the hearing closed. Thank you.